Hi, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of my discussion with Pepper Greggs about REST, the Restorative Response System Theory, that I would say she has developed, but that is not true. She will openly tell you that she received this information from her higher power, spirit, universe, her ancestors. And I am so excited now to do a deep dive into the first restorative response in response to the fight trauma response. So Pepper, unpack this one some more for us.
So we talked about before fight, everyone's calm down and how that just does not work.
Yeah.
And fight is it, when I think of fight, for me, I feel fire, I feel burning, I feel not necessarily passion, but definitely rage.
Yes.
And so, we can talk about in different spiritual spaces and religious spaces where leaders, allow themselves anger, which a lot of times goes into the fight response.
Yes.
And so I think that it's important to recognize that the fight response it's making a statement.
Absolutely.
It's making a statement about pain. It's making a statement about danger and fear and the threat of it.
Yes.
And so how do you fight? That doesn't even make sense, right?
Right. And how do you fight without shaming that fight response, which, and we talked about this in the introductory video, and I'm going to keep going back to it. Our trauma responses are valid.
Yeah. Yes. So when you find yourself wanting to fight, and even throughout the course of these videos, there may be moments where something is said that you're like, and you just kind of feel like this intense, like, wait, I want to fight against that. I want to, go with it. I'm not saying rage out and start throwing things, but I am saying, there's a great power in observing it.
Yes.
And letting it be.
And getting curious.
Right. And we used to talk to clients all the time about not letting themselves get swept up in the emotion, but allowing that wave to kind of wash over you. The wave is coming. You can't stop the ocean, right?
True. Yes.
So you have a couple of choices, and you can either swim and swim against that. You can either go with it. Some people have decided to perfect the art of surfing by going with the wave. And so it's kind of like, how do you surf the wave of fight?
Yeah.
And that particular one, we have chosen rhythm to be the response. And rhythm can look like dancing. It can look like playing drums. It can look like tapping.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times when I've been upset and I just, even though I'm feeling this way,
it's rhythm.
Tapping, yes. And it's movement. It's a rhythm. It's a cadence. This morning, I was doing this breathing exercise with my son, and he was kind of in a little bit of a fight response. And so you're all gonna laugh at this, but we did this with Linda Tide, where we do this deep inhale, and on the exhale, it's a very verbal on the exhale, right?
Yes.
And so we'll do this 2 or 3 times when we're feeling frustrated, when we're feeling a more internal type of fight.
Yes.
And that vibration of our vocal cords, that's a rhythm.
Yes.
And it helps us release that tension, that frustration, that as my little one says. And when you do that, you are giving that fight response an outlet. You're going with it. You're allowing it to resolve.
Right.
And you release energy that no longer serves you. You're also transmuting it.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Into something that does serve.
Right. And when if you've ever been in the kitchen and cooking and you're beating dough, like, this is another place that you can do that. Tenderizing the meat, this is another way to do that. These all of these things that, you know, when you think about ancient cultures and you think about why did they have a drum circle? Well, where does marching come from? The art, you know, why all these things? They are outlets. They are taking that passion, that fire, and using it in healing, constructive ways,
Right.
versus allowing themselves to get swept up in that wave and drown in it.
Right. Yes. Allow trauma responses, if we respond to them in a particular way, they can be destructive.
Yeah.
And I think so often our Western society gives us tools that turn that trauma response, that natural, normal trauma response into something destructive, whether it's, you know, shaming them because they're having a fight response, you know, which is just as destructive as it is telling them, you know, stop it, and them turning around and punching a hole in a wall.
Right.
If we give them that rhythm,
Right.
restoration response, there's neither the shame nor the broken hand from the hole in the wall.
Right. Yeah. And this is something that I'll be honest with you, that because the fight response for me in regards to trauma didn't really come about until I became an adult. My history with anger, my history with fight has always shifted to one of the other three trauma responses. So as an adult, when fight showed up, I was very ill-equipped with what to do with it. I only knew how to be destructive with it. And I started drowning with it. And you know, sitting with my anger, learning how to be present with that was so daunting. And it was something I had to learn how to do. And it was, especially in the space of fight, because it can be so destructive. It can come out in the way I speak to my loved ones. It can come out in the way that I'm handling a business matter. And I just, you know, as a person who really wants to live in the state of compassion, I also have to recognize that light and love aren't there all the time.
No.
And that if fight is showing up, I'm not at its mercy either.
No. And you're not doing anything wrong.
Correct. And so how can I honor it? How can I channel it? How can I use this in a way that brings healing, that and still gives me, you know, this outlet. So with rhythm, and that's just where I have found it is most effective. And like I said, it can be tapping, it can be using a musical instrument, it can just be a song with the right kind of rhythm in it. It can be, you can stomp, you can, you know, sometimes like when you think about the Tarzan yell, I brought this up earlier, but when you think about like the vocalization of it, there is a rhythm.
Yes,
there's a pattern to his vocalization as he releases that sound from his body.
It is, yes.
There's a reason
absolutely.
his chest, right?
Yeah.
There's a rhythm in beating the chest.
Yes.
And so whatever you choose is your rhythm, and it can shift because you can be in more than one trauma response at a time.
That's true.
You know, you can be in a fight and freeze, and you know, and I talk about this in the book with my husband. He was in a fight and a freeze, and he, you know, his freeze was he couldn't think because fight was in the way.
Yes.
Right. So when you address the first one, which is fight,
right,
then you can address the second one, which was freeze.
Yes.
And you can resolve it.
Yeah. You know, and I think fight is a particularly difficult one because it is so often attached to anger. Yep. And we are so often, especially those of us who are raised in developmental trauma, we were taught as children that anger is bad and wrong, except perhaps for some certain people. Like in my house, my father could be angry, and he could be angry and he could do whatever he wanted to.
Right.
But the rest of us, so when I have a fight response, my immediate response to that is to fight against it.
Yeah.
Because it means there's anger present, and I'm a bad person if I'm feeling anger.
Yeah. And that's that shame piece. And that's something that we address in the book throughout the theory is to know when you've moved from that trauma response to shame has entered the space.
Yeah.
Because where there's trauma, shame is usually there.
Yes.
And the complexity of trauma and healing it is understanding which is which and how they feed each other.
Yeah.
And when you can understand that shame bind, as we call it, then you can tell it, I'm gonna, like in parts where I'm gonna put my shame over here for a moment. I'm gonna look at the rawness of this anger.
Yeah.
Does this come from fear? Does this come from hurt? Does this come from something else? So that I'm not just treating a symptom.
Right.
I'm getting to the core of what's really going on. What is the injury here that has me wanting to punch someone in the face?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And I will say that for me as a survivor of developmental trauma, that the fight response, when it shows up usually in spaces where there's injustice. And the thing about justice is nobody wins. And that does not bode well with the fight response. It wants to fight, right? So, everyone's thought is choose peace, but it doesn't, peace is not the answer.
Yeah. No. But I love what you talked about separating the anger from the shame. And then you come back to the shame?
Absolutely. Yeah. Once you have given your fight response a resolve, a restore,
right.
And then you can go back to shame because it's going to be a very similar process and it'll probably go a little bit faster. But it's important to recognize when you've pulled this thing apart to go back to the pieces. Okay, now what if this is true?
Right.
What if this serves me? How do I, and I compare shame to the shepherd's staff. So the shepherd's staff is not supposed to beat the sheep. It is used to bring in the one of the 99.
Wow.
So when a part of me goes astray, it's not to keep them exiled.
Yeah.
Bring them back in. The only time the staff is used in combat is when there is a legitimate threat. So it's not that it never gets used in this way, but you don't beat the sheep with the staff.
No, it's get used against the wolf.
Correct. Because if you were to beat the sheep with the staff, then every time they see it, they're going to go right into a trauma response.
Right.
But if instead, and we see this a lot in religious spaces where the staff is being used to keep people in a trauma response, then we get what we call sheeple.
Yes.
If instead we're taking this weapon, this staff, and we're bringing in to the fold the one that's out there alone and exiled, and we're saying, you don't just let's pull this apart. Shame is not supposed to be toxic. It's not supposed to hurt you. It's not supposed to, it is supposed to keep you alive too.
Right. It's protective.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one thing in Western society, especially, that we weaponize shame straight out the gate. And we're so good at doing it to ourselves from such a young age. And, I remember that's one of the first things I grew up with was I'm not a good enough daughter because I behave this way, because I make these childish choices, because I'm not whatever the structure for a good kid, which no one ever actually knew was.
Right. We didn't know the rules. We just knew we didn't meet them. Right. Yeah.
And so when shame is pushing you further and further away from a thing, then it's not a healthy shame anymore. No. It's not serving you. It's hurting you.
No.
So yeah, you will always go back to shame, and you will always, where do you really come from? Where's the truth in this? And I think that it is such a powerful tool to help us remember, what is the truth? What's really the problem here? Not just because society said, not just because my parental figure said so, not just because school rules say so,
Right.
but what is the harm?
Yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
harm?
What is the harm? What do I think is the thing that keeps coming to my mind is the haka. Are you familiar with that, Pepper?
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a really great, they do this for war. They'll also do it to honor somebody in death post-war.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's if you've ever witnessed one,
They're very powerful.
The whole energy of the space, their whole face, all the muscles in their body are tense. Their stance is this very strong, like almost like a god type of stance.
Very majestic.
Right. And it's not just one individual doing it. There's a group of people, and they're all synchronicity. It's all one. When you look at martial arts,
Yeah.
martial arts is very methodical. They teach you, don't be reactive, think through how you're going to fight your opponent.
Yes. 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 And even the ones like Qigong, it's very rhythmic.
Yes. Yep.
To it.
And that is something that, when you look at the way children play and you think about even the dynamic, right? So when you think of music, there's a crescendo, there's a pause, there's honestly, all of these responses to trauma are somewhere in music theory.
Yes.
And that's a conversation for another day. But when you look at the way children play, there's always there's a beginning, and then there is a very dynamic point, and then there's always this resolve, this restoration. And you see it even in the way they fight. There's something builds up, something builds back down. Yes. Right. And so that tells me that, just because you find yourself in a risen space, in a reactive space, and again, back to animal training, just because your dog is being reactive on leash, it's not a bad dog. It's a response that something else needs to happen here. Give me some kind of rhythm. Sometimes it's forward motion. Sometimes we'll put the dog in a spin a couple of times, and just anything to help them get in a rhythm, in a cadence, in a synchronicity. And I think that for me, this is where I really believe communal care really can step up to the plate, because when I am with a group of people and we are chanting the same thing.
Yes. Yes.
We are one.
Yes.
Right. Yes. And you feel that power, the whole energy raise up. Like you just go into a concert and the singer is, there's like that one chorus that we all hit, and we're just all singing it together, and we're swaying. We're not standing still. We're swaying. We got our lighters on or our phones on. We're like, right. And so there's this, it's a very natural moving. It is a natural response.
Yes.
And this is how it's mind, body, soul work, because the body desires to move whenever there is a fight response.
Yep.
And it's not always just in my head.
No. And what a gift to give a survivor of not just that permission, but that encouragement to move.
Yeah.
To move.
Movement matters. Mindful movement. You can, I sometimes like to do meditation yoga, where I'm slowly moving and I'm paying attention to all the muscle tension and all the releasing of tension, and being that present can sometimes help me whenever I feel more fighty and spicy.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, Pepper, thank you so much for unpacking fight and rhythm and movement as the restorative response with us. So stay tuned. The next part of the video, we're going to start talking about flight and rise. Or I know that sometimes Pepper calls it soar, and for some reason that one speaks to me. in particular. So we will be back with part 3 of the video series, and we hope to see you there. Bye.